Well, welcome everyone to this Readvolution webinar. We are so excited to be here today to speak about a topic close to many of our hearts, reading for pleasure. And of course, today we're going to be talking about how we can encourage students to find a way to read for enjoyment so that becomes a long-standing practice. So very briefly, some technicalities to run through with you. This session will be recorded and shared online via email after. So by attending, you are consenting to this. A Q&A will take place at the end of the session. Type your questions in the chat and we will endeavor to answer as many as we can. This is a CPD webinar. By attending, you'll receive a certificate of attendance sent to your email after the webinar. In order to receive this, you'll need to stay on for the duration of the webinar, so please stay connected as it's sure to be a great conversation. We'll also send you a PDF of our literacy special report, which is found in the resources section of our website. So really to get things going, and before I introduce our esteemed guest, Mina Wood, who you can see here with us, we have a warm-up poll question to ask all of you to really engage with the topic today. And that question is really, how engaged are your students with reading? There's the pop-up question to answer. So we'll give you a few seconds to answer it. And we have a host of different answers. And here come the results. Okay, so a little bit of a spread, but 50% enjoy reading depending on the topic. Now that's interesting because we're going to get to this idea of how we can find topics that interest our students. 31% are indifferent, 15% dislike reading, and 4% love it. And I think at the heart of today's conversation is how can we increase that love for reading? So we're going to talk about that in different ways with Mina in a moment. But before we do that, I wanted to share some National Literacy Trust statistics. So just 2 in 5 children aged 8 to 18 said they enjoyed reading in their free time in 2023. Now, this is the lowest level since 2005, with fewer boys than girls enjoying reading. Fewer than 3 in 10 children read daily, and this is really just something to hold on to as context as we talk to Mina right now. And without further ado, let me give a brief bio of Mina Wood, and we're so happy to have you here today, Mina. So Mina Wood is an international speaker, educational trainer, author, and leadership coach. She's the author of the popular Secondary Curriculum Transformed, Enabling All to Achieve. She supports academies and MATs, including alternative provision providers, conducting peer reviews, curriculum and assessment reviews, and self-evaluation. Now, Mina specializes in the quality of education, inspection, governance, and the leadership of instructional coaching. In addition, she works with British and international schools in the Middle East, specifically Dubai and India, and is currently a registered KHDA inspector in Dubai. Mina, we are so excited to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us for this very important conversation. At this point, I'm just going to hand it over to you because we're so excited to hear your words. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a lovely introduction. Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate that. Good afternoon, everybody, and I'm so pleased and thrilled that obviously I can be here and share with you my thoughts on encouraging literacy, reading for pleasure, and accessing the curriculum, because that's really where I'm coming from. My former life, I was an HMI with Ofsted, and before you all start booing and hissing, it was way before the current times. I left in 20. Yeah, somebody's asking a question, online reading or reading books. Yeah, I'll come to that. Yeah, so an HMI with Ofsted. In a former life, I left in 2014, and I will put it out there. I am very disappointed in the way Ofsted has evolved, particularly in the way it inspects reading, and I will say something about that. I was also head teacher, principal of an academy, a large secondary academy, and after, in 2019 I left. So that's when I wrote the book. Now, my particular emphasis in this is about, as it says in the title of the book, enabling all to achieve. And I was really shocked when I saw the statistic that went up just now about the 4% who love reading. And if you look at that in comparison to, let's say, 10 years ago, or even 20, 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, it is drastically, it has drastically gone down. It's radically low. So what can we do in schools, in academies, up and down the country, in primary and secondary, and in early years as well, I want to say, but I'm not going to talk about early years as much as primary and secondary. I think somebody's link's not working, but anyway. I'm actually going to focus on primary and secondary because I believe the strategies we can use in school, which is within our gift, are going to be very similar. And the reason I'm going to focus on primary and secondary is if we look at the stats, Matt shared some, and I want to share some with you, which I'm sure you're probably all familiar with, is that less than 3/4, 68% of pupils have reached the expected reading standard in 2023. Goodness knows what it's going to be like this year in the SATs. And this is the worst statistic, I think. Only half, or just over half, 59%, leave primary school with expected standards in reading, writing, and maths. Now, we can talk about reading for pleasure, but reading permeates across the curriculum and it permeates maths as well. And one of the stats one of the things I'm going to say to you is last year I spoke to some children in a primary school who just sat the SATs. And if some of you can remember, those of you certainly primary colleagues will know that the SATs reading test was especially difficult. And I said to them, why did you find it so difficult this year? They said, well, and this was what they said, you had to know what was lying behind the writing, behind the text. And it wasn't really that apparent. So what does that say? It basically says that they are not being taught inference, deductive skills, reasoning skills. And when they read a text, they aren't able to actually dig deep. So that will stop comprehension, that will stop, it will do. It will have an impact on that love of reading. And I want to explain why. So if we then move into secondary, I know from my experience as a head teacher in my school, actually 1/3 of children who arrived in year 7 did not have the reading age they needed to access the curriculum. Now, if we look at that stat of 59% nationally, then you're looking at just over half of children on average across the country are not secondary ready. And then if you add to that, 1/3 failing GCSE maths and English every year. So it's pretty dire, and I would suggest it all comes from literacy and reading. Also, I want to point out the PIRLS and PISA international tests for 10 to 15-year-olds show that those who choose to read at home in their own time regularly and widely score far more on reading attainment tests than their peers who do not choose to read at home. So I think armed with those statistics, I want to share with you a tool which I think you might find helpful. Some of you may know it, and I'll be really, really thrilled if you do, because it'd be great when the question and answer if you can tell me that you do and perhaps share with colleagues some of the good practice. It's the Scarborough's reading rope, which Matt is going to share the image with you. And while he's doing that, I just wanted to talk around that. If you are familiar with that, yes, I can certainly give you the stats. In fact, I did this this whole presentation in another conference, and all of these, what I'm talking to you now, come from there. So I can definitely give you some more stats and further information to look at. Scarborough's reading rope. It'd be absolutely fantastic if you could raise your hand so I can get a feel for how many people are familiar with this. Because there's nothing like not knowing your audience, is there? And I do want to know my audience. So while I'm talking, if you can just, raise your hand, and if Matt can just tell me how many people know it, it would be great, of the people who are present. Are they still ready? Sorry, Matt?
We're going to get a tally for how many
fantastic.
people.
Okay. Here goes. Now, you can see this was developed by Dr. Hollis Scarborough in the 1990s. What she did was she used this reading rope to explain to parents how children read and explain the various skills they bring to reading and what they need to become proficient readers. Because unless you're a proficient reader or a fluent reader, it is really difficult to enjoy reading for pleasure. So she originally made that model using pipe cleaners to demonstrate a point, as you can see there. Now, if you look at the first tranche, the purple and green and yellow, that comprises language comprehension, background knowledge, vocabulary, language structure, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. The second strand becomes increasingly automatic for children. That's what we push from early years onwards. Phonological awareness, decoding, sight recognition, phonics as well. I mean, I'll put phonics because obviously that's decoding. Now, this is where I think we need to be actually looking at the balance of what we do when we teach reading with children. And this will be at any stage, because as children become increasingly automatic in their reading, in decoding, for example, and using phonics or whatever methods are being used, they need something more. What do they need for it to become skilled reading? If you can see right at the end, when it's completely knotted together, the skilled reading bit is a combination of the language comprehension and the word recognition. Now, that may appear to be pretty obvious to everybody, but I want to put it to you. How often in lessons do we actually stop and really ascertain comprehension from children? Or how often when we're reading a text do we just assume, when we've asked a few questions and a few children have answered, forgive me, I'll just turn that off, that we've actually, you know, we've got what majority of the class has understood, so we can move on. And that I have seen in my observations when I've been at HMI or when I've been in schools, working with schools as a consultant. It is a teacher who needs to take that time to understand their pupils and to know which pupils are at the language comprehension stage and are now on that road, if you like, to skilled reading, and which ones are still working at that word recognition stage and are barking at print. And that is an expression that's used that some of you will be familiar with. So they may know the words, they'll sit there reading them out, but do they really understand what they're reading? If one strand is weak, it affects the rope as a whole. And if you can get that strand in place, and particularly with parents, if you can start developing that with your parents, they can start to understand what they need to do at home with children from a younger age in terms of that language comprehension. Because word recognition on its own doesn't create fluent readers. Absolutely not. And this is where Ofsted actually ties it, if I may use the metaphor, ties itself up in knots. Because what Ofsted tends to be saying to us all the time is that, you know, we can't have children reading books which are not within their phonics levels. Now, that is precisely what is actually creating children who are becoming disenchanted with reading, children who are actually unable to progress because they're being fettered. They're not able to, you know, choose the book. And let's face it, agency and choice of book is key to a reading culture, which should be pervasive across the school. You know, if a child picks up a book that they can't read, and in early years, that's what they'll do, but we don't sort of say to them, no, you can't read that book, even though you like those pictures, then why are we stopping children in primary? You know, if they're not reading books within their phonics levels, it's absolutely a no-brainer. So for my part, this move, you know, has come in actually at the wrong time. And so what Ofsted is expecting is reading fluency and comprehension. And they will not get it. You will not get it, sadly, unless you develop the top strand. And the top strand is absolutely key. Now, the way children develop deeper understanding, improved literacy skills in the best way possible is across curriculum. And one of the things I will say to you is that you know, if you are teaching cross curriculum, which unfortunately again with Ofsted, they've decided to go into silo subjects. I think that's being disbanded from September anyway, from what I hear. From the EIF, they're moving to getting rid of the deep subject dives, which I think is the best thing they could do. So the cross-curriculum learning then hopefully will come into play. And in primary and secondary schools, you know, if you can start linking climate change impact in human and physical geography with the science of climate change and make those connections for children when they're reading texts, then that's when you start igniting that little spark and they start seeing relevance. They start seeing connections. You know, they'll see, well, yeah, flooding and wildfires in those parts of the world are linked to that interesting silent science of climate change that we're actually reading about in science. They're not seeing it as a separate subject. And that actually makes them want to perhaps research more. Why not? You know, connecting the boy in striped pajamas, the book, you know, set in World War II, and asking children at the same time the history facts that they've learned. They've learned these off by heart. So they can then start using these in that lesson. They don't see history as being different to English, you know, to learning, to reading, to enjoyment. They see it as one actually sparks the other. And I think this is the point that we need to get round our head, that this is not about reading as an isolated topic. For me, it's every teacher a literacy teacher, including maths. So I would suggest, right, I'm going to put a plug in for the day because as a head teacher, I brought it into my school many years ago. I will hasten to add 2016, I should say. It wasn't as beautiful and as evolved and sophisticated and as wow as it is now, because I really love it now. It's fantastic, particularly the foreign languages section, because I was a foreign languages teacher, so I love that. But what I did, I had it in my tutor groups. I had it in particularly from year 7 to 6th form. And what we found was that the actual topics that children could pick, you know, these are structured around everyday events, around current awareness of the news, what's going on. Linking them to curriculum subjects was pretty ideal as the context, reasoning skills and critical literacy were being practiced. They didn't know that. They would sit in their tutor groups and talk about things which they just thought was, oh, we're having a discussion around such and such. However, later in the day, the science teacher could say, oh, did you know what happened today? You know, in such and such about climate, let's go back to climate change. And the child could, yeah, we read about it this morning. And that's the kind of linkages, relevance that becomes so key to developing and fostering a love of reading that goes beyond, you know, actually being in the classroom. Right. And I see the plugs coming from that end, which is fantastic. Coming back, you know, to reasoning skills per se, this year's SATS paper was particularly difficult in maths. Why? And I want to say this is because the reasoning skills, again, were being questioned around prime numbers. Now, you can now begin to see how important all of that in the first part is becoming in the whole aspect, the whole area of accessing curriculum, whether it's primary or secondary. Let's move on. Let's move on to how we do the reading for meaning strategies. So somebody mentioned at the beginning, sorry, Matt, I'm probably running over my time, Bradley.
No, you're perfect.
Okay.
This is really interesting.
Someone mentioned at the beginning, you know, what about online reading as opposed to reading texts? Now, I'm very old-fashioned, so forgive me. I prefer a book. Okay, that's my preference. But I know today, you know, online reading is what it is. What I would point out is the problem we have today with children, particularly, is that they're accustomed to social media. We know that texting, it's developing very low concentration spans. And this is spilling over into lessons and attitudes to academic texts. So what is happening is we all know we've got skimming, scanning, and we've got reading for deeper meaning. Sadly, a lot of children stay at the skimming stage. And then when you ask them as a teacher, can you tell me such and such, they have to scan. Now, they can't scan unless they've understood the entirety of that text, and they can go backwards, forwards, and sideways in understanding it. So if that in itself has become a unique barrier to reading, and it can become a unique barrier if the only thing that children do is online reading, because we all know that becomes kind of too much at the end of the day. Children will look for shortcuts. So there is a subtle difference between reading speedily and reading with meaningful fluency. Another point I would say in terms of teachers, and I'm guilty of it myself when I was teaching. I taught right up until I left. As a head teacher, I was teaching French. So PowerPoint slides and knowledge organizers. Now, I didn't tend to use those very much in my lessons because my emphasis was on oracy. I believe learning languages, you have oracy comes first and then the written language. But there are so many classes now and teachers using PowerPoint slides and knowledge organizers with condensed phrases, images, glossary, sound bites that will not necessarily help pupils access the extended text structures or look deeper. So sadly, we are in danger, and this is a paradox, an ironic paradox, that making curriculum more accessible in the short term makes it harder to effectively read in the long term, and is actually putting kids off. If you imagine a child moving, and this is, I mean, I've had the privilege to do this when I've been an HMI, and obviously as a head teacher, I can go into lessons, moving from one lesson to another, geography, history, English, you name it. And each time what they're doing is they have a PowerPoint presentation. I'm just assuming the teacher's asking questions, question answer, ping pong going on there. And then it's like, get down, read your narrative, read your test online or in a book and answer those questions. That in itself is sometimes going to be quite detrimental to children developing that love of reading and understanding how important it is. So that I think, we need to be looking at that very importantly, and how, what Ofsted is looking for is, if you like, that the children, this cognitive science scenario they keep banging on about, that you have to learn all these facts and knowledge is key. Well, let me tell you, knowledge happens when you can access a text, and knowledge is like, it's like Velcro. When you have a bit of knowledge, you get more knowledge, it sticks onto it, you build it up. But if that knowledge is a disconnected fact and you're not enabled or motivated to read more about that knowledge, then what will happen is it shuts down. So you will never go beyond that little bit of knowledge, okay? And that's the bit I would say to you. So I can give you one example of a lesson I went into when I was HMI. And this was with a child who had got all the facts of Hitler's rise to power between 1930 and 1939. And he knew them off by heart. And all the children got knowledge organizers. They were all learning these facts and they got them, every single bit. But when I actually spoke to him and 3 other children and said, well, how does Hitler's rise to power date back to the Treaty of Versailles and First World War, which you've actually done? And they looked at me as if I was literally speaking a foreign language at that point, because they couldn't make the connections. And they had obviously learned about both, right?
And I think, Nina, on that point about connections, and only because I think we're getting some questions that we want you to answer based on everything you've shared, which is really interesting, especially this idea of digging deep, some of the highlights for me, digging deep and really breaking down reading using the Scarborough rope, because I've never disentangled the strands like that. And now you've given me this takeaway that I can use to really pinpoint what's at stake when we're embedding reading as a practice, whether it be for the curriculum, as you really know, or for pleasure, which, if you'll allow me, I might spend, we're going to ask another poll question after you give us this little tidbit, because we'd really like to hear this as well. But maybe I can dive into share a little bit how we do that the day as well. But by all means, tell us what you were going to say, because that sounds really interesting as too.
Yeah, I was just going to say that one of the things I think we need to be very wary of when we create a curriculum and a reading curriculum, because it is reading across the curriculum, has our school provision and practice become a reading roadblock? And how do we reduce the inequalities gap between the reading rich and the reading poor?
Yeah.
So if we just look back to your stats, 4% enjoy reading. Now
Yeah.
we know those 4% are going to become fluent. Well, they are probably fluent readers, and they're going to enjoy reading outside, whether it's online or books. Okay.
Yeah.
But there were so many in there. I think I took a picture shot of it, who were indifferent. It's the indifferent that I find really hard to grasp, because it means they've been turned off.
Yes.
And note, I think it was 39%. I can't remember the figure. It was very high. It probably correlates to, again, the people who've not passed their SATs, or, you know, going to not pass their maths, English GCSEs or whatever. So I think we have to strategically change the way we deliver reading. And I think there has to be more cross-working with teachers. 31%. Yeah, my God, 1/3. So it was 1/3, I said, who failed their maths and English GCSEs every year.
Yeah.
And so there's a bit of coincidence, isn't it? But I think we all children deserve an all-pervasive reading culture across the curriculum. It's not about, you know, when you have signs up outside of the door, Miss Soames reads whatever book is. That's great. That's absolutely fantastic. This is actually about teachers planning their curriculum together, so that they make those connections across the curriculum. Children then see this, you know what, I need reading skills to get on top of this, you know. So yeah, with book clubs, someone's had a big issue with book clubs. That I could say something about, because we did book clubs in my school. But yeah, I mean, please. I've got some ideas on how to do it, but you know, in subject areas, but I'm sure people know some of these scaffolding. The EEF has got some resources which people can look at, but I've got what I was doing and what I was encouraging my staff to do: scaffolding of text, adaptive teaching. So you know which children, again using your Scarborough's reading rope, are actually at that level, that you can actually create a graph and say some of them are in between, some are here, some are there. DARTS, which is directed activities related to text, which you can break it down. Working out your high-low redundancy reading score, you know, this I know this sounds like an awful lot of work, and when are we going to do that? Probably teachers are saying, and I would totally accept that. But you know what? Schools are data rich, but I think they need to be data smart. They need to collect what they need to let children access that curriculum. This is a broader picture here. This is not just about, oh, I need some information, you know, for the sake of it. Yeah. And then I think for me, I mean, there's lots of things there I've got, but for me, what I really love when I'm testing out comprehension, Padlets, I think, are fantastic, great way of doing, you know, getting children to, you know, what they've understood, and to put it up there and share. And I saw some marvelous examples in Dubai in the schools there. And hinge questions. I'm just going to finish off on that one, but I don't know how many people are aware of hinge questions and use them in their lessons at all. But I'll just put it there. So it's not about a multiple choice. And again, I've seen it used in maths. I've seen it used in geography, history. It's not about multiple choice, not no right, wrong answer. It's what the child chooses to answer, which shows the gaps in their knowledge or misconceptions. So my example would be volcanoes cause, you know, if you've got a series of little options, but volcanoes cause tectonic plate movement, and that child is mixing cause and effect. They pick that answer, right? Yeah. Okay, but volcanoes can occur on land and sea. That is a correct answer, but there may be others. The idea is not to say to that child who's got it wrong, you got it wrong. The idea is to use that information, think about their literacy skills and what is it they've not understood. So that is quite a basic, isn't it, fact, which they've clearly passed them by, and yet we're carrying on teaching about volcanoes. So I think, you know, literacy is absolutely key. We've discussed that. It has to be about a culture. And it has to be about oracy as well, oracy. And that's where I think, coming back, I'll just do a final plug for the day, because I do like it. I loved it because it encouraged oracy and literacy in that time that the children had. And if it had been as evolved as it is today, I would have used it in very different ways again. So yeah, that's it.
I love that.
That's my offering.
That's wonderful. You've given us so many takeaways. And I think on your point to Oracy, as I listen to your words and really inspired by some of the things we can do as educators, above your head, you'll see our logo, but also our new strapline. So this is brand new to us. And we are imploring for students to find their voice, find
Yeah,
your voice.
I
So
think so.
it all goes back to, we're talking about literacy today. Yes, reading for pleasure, reading across the curriculum, but also how do we speak with conviction, with confidence, and have that care and challenge that indifference at such a high rate. I hope everyone in the audience right now is coming up with questions because we are going to allow a little time to answer that. I do think very quickly my team is going to put up one other poll, which is going to link in with what we've just talked about. And it really is, what's the biggest barrier to reading for pleasure? Lack of time, lack of appropriate engaging resources, students' lack of interest, or anything else. Let us know in the chat because this is the really valuable stuff that we can all connect on as teachers. So we give a second to get that answer. The results are coming and they are up. Okay.
Interesting. Lack of interest again.
So that lack of interest is really in
It's
chorus
really
with
key, isn't it?
difference.
But that I would suggest is a long-term thing, because
Yes.
that's what I said to you, wasn't it? If you don't, you see, when children in early learning, early years foundation, I've been in a, I've obviously inspected early years, and you don't notice that lack of interest. You don't notice indifference, right? They're really keen. They're really wanting to learn. They learn through play when they're allowed to in schools, although that's disappearing very fast, unfortunately, because of Ofsted not particularly encouraging it. But not school libraries are important. Yes, absolutely. I would totally agree with that. I was about to say that because our school librarian was key in producing the day resources and so on, encouraging children. We also subscribe to Reading Wise as well and use that. So what I was going to say was that when you've got children, then they go into primary, and then in primary they're being limited. I did say, sadly, the conflict between the phonics, the decoding, and so on. That's where it becomes a real problem. People are saying about lacking time as well as interest. Now, the time thing is interesting because I'm sure a lot of you know about what is it called again? Not dirt, the other one. What was it called? Drop everything and read, dear.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and now that was quite a little phase, wasn't it? A little fad that people used to use. I saw that quite often. Again, I would argue now you're allowing children to read. That's absolutely super. I get that, but I don't know who's reading and who's not, and whether they're really reading or they're not reading, or And I just feel with a wide range. Yeah, that's fantastic. It was some of Chantel's just said, fantastic school library. So I do wonder, what the value is of that. I wonder if again, I would come back to it, if there is something that encourages, yeah, on spare time. That's what I was going to say. Yeah, monitored through us, accelerate. Yeah, I was going to say accelerate reader. That's what I was doing in my school. They would come into the library. They'd have a library session with accelerate reader, especially at GCSE. I didn't get the rest of that. Not seeming to understand, not building it. Yeah, that I would totally get that one about SLT. Very few leaders. I hope there are more now, but I know when I was doing what I was doing, it was very foreign to our MAT because it was a MAT I was part of. And that's the other problem you might come up against. It's not necessarily your head teacher or principal. It'll be the MAT policy, which might contravene what you're trying to do. But there's some fantastic comments coming out there. I'd love to read them. I'm trying to do very quick skimming now.
You've ignited, I think, a chorus of everyone sharing
It's
what they're up
fantastic.
against.
Yeah, it is
And that's
fantastic. And
because
I
of your
think
words.
love to read to, yeah, to be read to. And I've seen that as well, where they love to be read to. But I'm not sure. I mean, I would like to hear what people have to say about when children read out loud in class. I don't know whether that's interesting. Links the curriculum to novels through the L4L. Yeah, okay. Mangas are
Okay.
fine. Let them develop further. Mangas.
You know what I'm going to invite everyone to do, Mina? I'm
Yeah.
going to have those questions come in. My team are going to manage those questions so we can put some to you
Yeah, I think so.
towards the end of the webinar. I am going to do the fastest demo I've ever done in my life of the day because you hit on some really key themes of this presentation, which is how do we make those connections? How do we challenge indifference? How do we lean into this idea of reading and understanding how we connect that across pleasure, but also every subject that these students are, up against in classrooms. So what I will do, and I know we are a little bit short of time,
Yeah,
because
I agree with
those
Ricardo.
questions from the audience are very important to me. But I'm going to share my screen and
Can
very
I just say
quickly,
something while
of
you're doing
course,
that, Matt? Just one
yes,
thing about encouraging reading again. One of the things I did in my school was we had mentors. We had sixth formers who were mentors
nice.
to younger pupils. And they kind of sat with them and read with them. I think some schools have that. And they would do that first thing in the morning, or at lunchtime. And that, when somebody said about book clubs not being very successful, the mentors, so it wasn't adults who would go in, it would be mentors, the sixth formers.
Yeah,
I linked it to the ASDAN certificate for the sixth formers. So they
yeah.
developed a little portfolio CV type thing where we would sign off what they did. So that was helpful. But
Oh,
I think mentoring, older children, I think that is
mm.
a really good way to go.
Absolutely. And
So
I
I'll
think,
shut up
yeah,
now.
just no, it's so germane. And I think really leaning into what you said, what I've done is if everyone can see my screen, I've brought up one of our most popular articles from this week. And it's not surprising that it's sports because this is a demographic of
Yeah.
readers that we want to reach because if we can connect with something we love, and here I'm Liverpool based, who doesn't love this manager? Jurgen Klopp. So I brought it up purposely, so it's something we can all galvanize around. But I think we all can agree that the best way into reading is reading stories that interest us deeply. So we have students in mind when it comes to the content created by our team of writers and editors. And I just wanted to show the way those students can challenge that indifference to reading is by coming up here to our toolbar and finding what ignites them, using your words, Mina, what sparks their interest. So we can go across topics here like sport, which is how I found this article on Jurgen Klopp, right here, the normal one who made us believe again. Equally, and I'm thinking about my teachers in the audience right now, we can go to subjects. So if you're thinking, how can I talk about geography to my students? Well, you could go right here and click right in. And what the beauty of our literacy here in terms of how we approach reading, because we've had that discussion in the audience about books versus online reading. We tackle literacy across different media formats. What I mean by that is we have videos. We know that posters are a way into reading. We know that infographics are a way into reading. Even numeracy, so this idea of loving numbers is a way into reading. So
Mm.
I'm just scrolling here very quickly. A lot of my teachers in the audience will know about these ports right now, but it's really important to see that there's so many ways. We're more than just an article, and that's what I really want to draw out. If you are visually led as a learner, I'd invite you to look at one of our posters because they're that interesting. You're still reading a lot here.
Yeah.
And I want to pick up on something you said that's so important. You said, what about comprehension? How do we know that students are comprehending what they read? And if we go to resources and we click right here into quizzes, what we find here is that we're asking our students to tell us what they've read over the last week.
Mm.
Why is that important? Because it brings gamification into reading. It makes it pleasurable to test your knowledge. And it's so easy to do. You just click right here on the orange button. It brings up the question. And if the student doesn't know the answer, not a problem, because you just click on the blue hyperlink, brings you right back to the original article. You can find the answer. So in this way, we're bringing a bit of fun disguised as comprehension. And why that's important is teachers and students start to become experts in what they read. And it's my belief when you become an expert in something and you feel like you're mastering it, it just draws you to dive in deeper and deeper. And I think with that said, if I just go back to that article that we were talking about with the manager of Liverpool, who's sadly left, as we all know, what we do to really find that spark, using again your words, Mina, is we go down here after that article, we have dive in deeper areas where they can make further connections about this subject. And that leads me to what our USP really is about, our 6 steps to discovery, where we ask our students to connect, wonder, investigate, construct, express, and reflect on what they've read. And when I'm really thinking about a love of reading, I really emphasize number 1. How do you feel about this story? And the reason why I bring up 1 out of 1 to 6 is if you can put yourself into this story and say, this is what it means to me, this is what I feel. Again, we're creating that muscle memory, that emotion that hopefully will lead readers back to articles and anything that interests them. And as you saw up in our toolbar, we cover everything from climate change to artificial intelligence, politics, sports. If you love something, The Day has written an article about it. So what I'm going to do, because it's already 4:40 and these questions that are coming in are super important, if you're happy for this, Mina, I'm going to leave it here. If anyone has any questions about The Day, please connect with us. We're happy to do a training with you, one-on-one or with a group of teachers. It's what we love to do here at The Day. And I'm going to put a question to you right now, Mina, after I stop sharing my screen. And this has come from someone in the audience, which is wonderful. How do you address the challenge of bias and misinformation when using current affairs as teaching materials?
The bias, the bias and that's
Yeah.
a very, very good question, because actually I wrote about it in my book. Because what we don't do is exactly that. And sadly, I mean, I won't go into the politics of it, but we all know that there is, huge, what should we say, emphasis from the government as to what we can teach, what we can't teach, what's woke, what's not woke, all of that business. In Finland, I'll have to say, and this is what they did, they were worried about the Russians infiltrating their media and creating bias. Surprise, surprise. So therefore, what they did in their school curriculum, and this was not done now, this was done when I was writing the book, so that was 2019. They started from primary, moving into secondary. The curriculum had to be taught, whatever you were teaching, you had to get children to ask questions about, what they were reading. They weren't answering questions, because remember, what we do mostly is get children to answer questions. So what they did before they answered the questions on a particular text, they had to ask the questions about things like how genuine it was. What would be another way of putting it? What is the bias? So it's anything from art to history, geography, science and so on. So it's about checking the veracity of it. Can you look at another source? Is there another source that can tell you how accurate this is? The point of that being that you're encouraging critical literacy in children, because that is sadly where they're going to go. Depending on the newspaper they read or the social media they read, they're going to be influenced hugely, and they aren't going to necessarily realize that there is more around. That's why, again, reading becomes important. The other thing I would say, AI, moving into the world of AI, which I think we should be, and again, I saw really brilliant examples over in Dubai. With that, you can actually, create characters that come out of the book. So your manager could be a character that's created through a ChatGPT, I think it is. And then the children have to raise, the questions that you've written down. They have to actually ask the manager those questions. So they are doing a little, and the manager will answer those questions. And then again, they have to start thinking critically about what the manager has said. And if they're going to write an essay at the end, which you've said they should do, they will have kind of information on it. It develops creative writing. But I think AI has many, many, many uses, which we haven't even gone into, but it's something I'm, really keen on. Yeah, I think critical thinking is incredibly important. I just feel it's just not there. It's not there, and we know why it's not there, because it's not encouraged from top down, from the DFE and states.
Yeah. Mina, am I correct in saying I think we could speak all afternoon on this?
Sorry?
I said, am I correct in saying that we could speak all afternoon on this if time
I
allows?
think we could, definitely. Yeah, we could solve the world's problems in terms of literacy.
I mean,
I think you've got an audience there who are so full, a wealth of information, ideas. It's been so lovely looking at what's coming up on the screen. I love it. It's
I'd like to
fantastic.
personally invite you and everyone in this audience to our July webinar because we've never had an audience this interactive. This has been the fastest webinar in my mind because I could talk to you all evening. I really want to thank you for these really salient tips, these takeaways that we're all going to utilize, really thinking again about the framework you've given us. And I just wanted to just say, like, I do hope we can continue this conversation again. And what we have in the chat for anyone who's in the audience right now is we have a summer offer that I hope everyone takes advantage of. The details I think my team have put up, but if you become a member of the day, we're giving away a term free if you sign up before May 31st. For any of our existing schools, we also want to let you know that we now do a QR code to make access to the day even easier than before. So just contact us and we'll be sure to send you a QR code so you have a way for students just to take a picture and start reading the day immediately. But without further ado, I will just say goodbye to everyone. Thank you so much for one of the most interesting conversations we've had in a long time, Nina. You've been fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, everybody.
All the best, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.